What's up, y'all? Welcome to the 15th episode of the Unity or Death podcast and the last podcast on our Fed month, which is, kind of perfect for everything that's happened with my buddy getting released from federal custody and all that. And I figured that I would bring on somebody who's a little bit of an expert on this subject and all of its instances that have gone on lately of the FBI creating their own terror subjects, their own terror plots, their own terror cells, and then stopping them to run in and claim to be the heroes of the day. But really quick, before we get into that, we do technically have a sponsor now. We have my buddy, he goes by Boog Boogie on Twitter. He's printing shirts. He's printing these right here. So if you can go there, go on Twitter, buy some of those. That helps the show out. That helps him out. I love the design. It's super cool. And with that out of the way, real quick, I'm going to welcome on the one, the only, Mr. Jason Bermas. How you doing, my man?
Great to be here, man, because when we talk about the FBI, I think that we have to realize, even since its inception, there have been those that go after general federal crimes, bank robberies, etc., things that are on that scale. But when you started getting organized crime from its very inception, they were embedded in organized crime. They were embedded in what they would call the mafia, while denying it, of course, with J. Edgar Hoover. So that's a very, very, very important aspect to all of this because, most of us grew up watching films where the FBI was the good guy, or Scully and Mulder were going to find the aliens. There were bad guys, but most of those guys weren't FBI, or they were just dumb in the FBI, right? So overarchingly, we've been kind of brainwashed to think that there isn't a large criminal element to the FBI when that's the power structure. That's what brings you COINTELPRO. That's what brings you not only informants and assets, but what will eventually become terror plots way before, January 6th, way before even 9/11. And I hope that we get into the vast majority of that today.
Absolutely. I'm super excited for it. So to open it up, this is the question I wanted to ask you in the beginning. Favorite might be a bad term for it, but I'm going to run for it. What is your favorite case of the FBI getting caught creating their own crime, their own terror plot? What's the one that is so horrifying or entertaining or preposterous that you could think of that would be your quote unquote favorite?
Well, there are a lot of preposterous ones. I mean, and the documentation on a lot of this is limited depending on how much they've been exposed, right? So if we were to go into recent years, and this is, I can't say it's a favorite, but I'll say that it's accessible and it shows the absurdity and the tenacity of an FBI to create something that is never going to be there. Okay. And I think that's important. When I say never going to be there, if the FBI is not involved, that means never. That means never sauce, not even on like a low level, right? Because I'm not going to sit here and tell you that extremism in all religions doesn't actually exist, and violent extremism, especially in the Middle East, and those tools haven't been used in guerrilla warfare and other types of actions. They have been, right? But when you think about something like in the United States, you never had low-level terror cells just blowing something up, suicide bombings, etc. A lot of that has to do with the quality of life that you have in this country, right? You're not wondering where your next meal is. All of a sudden, tomorrow looks a little brighter than today. Maybe you have the access to get your family over. There are other options that run through your head. When you're in a third world country that's being dominated by a first world military, maybe even a UN type global force, just putting it out there, or at this point, mercenaries, you don't necessarily have that mindset, right? You might be dedicated, right? So with that kind of thing, you would need terror cells in large scale. However, those things fall apart when these guys come to the United States in most places. So post 9/11, for instance, they had to manufacture a plot in Newburgh. And I think it's called the Newburgh Five. People can really look it up.
They had a documentary about this that was pulled off of Netflix because it was probably just too good for,
That's
good
what I'm discussing. And I'm pretty sure HBO put it out many, many years ago. And what caught me is I remember it at the time because I grew up in Dutchess County for most of my young life. Until I was about 12 years old. I still have family down there. In fact, I have an aunt and uncle that still live out in Newburgh, and I visit them from time to time, and I knew that area very well. And I immediately was calling bullshit on this. I was like, there's no way. And it was surrounded this pizzeria. And right away I called them like, these guys got entrapped. You're going to find out that they had a low level of intelligence, a low income, and they were brought together by some kind of FBI informant. And that's exactly what happened. And basically what the FBI did is they gave this guy all sorts of money and assets, like nice cars, and he was able to take them out to dinner, and he had wads of cash, and he could buy low-level things with them.
That's a recurring theme we will get to is usually the people that are attracted by this Fed is because the Fed is just like the party guy. He's given them money, he's taking them out to eat, he's giving them, taking them to parties and stuff like that. And a lot of these people are low status individuals. So they're like, oh, I have a friend and he's so awesome. I'm going to clubs, he's paying my bills. Like, how could this be a Fed?
And for me, I was a poor kid growing up. I was very much, I wouldn't say a ward of the state, but a kid to a teenage mother. And my dad was in and out of the prison system, and even locally in those areas, had gone to jail in those areas. So I already kind of had an idea of what the desperation over there was and how something like that could be attractive to these guys. So what you had was all these guys that had low-level rap sheets. They were at a local mosque trying to straighten their lives out. This guy appears out of nowhere, and they're still low-level criminals. So they're selling him, first it's, they can get him drugs, they can get him guns. We're talking about Newburgh's about 45 minutes, 50 minutes from the city, from getting right across the bridge and right in, very easily accessible, decent level of crime in certain areas. So these guys are going along with anything he says because they're going to rob him. They have no intention of going with this terrorist plot, but they know there's a lot of money involved. And so, throughout the whole thing, and he's taping them, it's all FBI, and these guys have no intention of a terror plot. They just want, I think it was somewhere between like 40 and 100 grand that was on the table that they were going to roll this guy for. And they made it out to, we got these pizzeria guys, and there's a mosque involved, and the whole nine. And it was all made up, all of it. And again, I don't say that's my favorite. I say because that's a microcosm from what went on post 9/11, but pre 9/11 was really an extension of that. And I was going to play a segment. I had just rendered this. I'm going to be putting it exclusively on Rockfin in the highest definition ever for free. My film Invisible Empire. And let me see if I can knock that up without causing any sound and just jump to it. And just play this subsection here of the 93 World Trade Center bombing, because I think it's really important that people understand what happened there. Was you had the Blind Sheik, right? We've all heard the Blind Sheik plot. So you had Blind Sheik, you had Ramzi Youssef and others. And Ramzi Youssef, he's the first one saying that there were higher level plots to ram planes into buildings. They had that information all the way back in 93. But he had followers. Now, both of these followers who end up driving a van filled with explosives against it was supposed to be against one of the main columns. They parked it like a couple of spots away from the main column. That's why it didn't blow up. It had something like 8 deaths, a bunch of injuries, but it was largely forgotten, right? This truck bomb. The bomb doesn't happen without their paid FBI informant who they bring in, who is actually an ex-Egyptian army officer they recruit at a New York City hotel. And largely people do not understand that this happened, but I'm going to document it right here, right in front of your face. It's going to be impossible for you to deny this once you see it. And again, the importance here is that none of this happens without the FBI. And the guy's not stupid. He realizes he might be being set up. So he starts recording his conversations with the FBI. And what you're going to hear is Ahmed Salam talking to his FBI handler. If memory serves me correct, and I hope I don't get this wrong, I believe it's John Antisev, and talking about how he built the bomb and he feels bad that it exploded. Okay, so without further ado, let's start playing it. E3. A truck bomb had gone off in the parking area of the World Trade Center.
Luckily, the bombers failed to follow instructions and parked the truck carrying the explosives against the main support column. What is not discussed, however, is the bomb was actually built by an FBI informant under the supervision of the FBI. Ahmed Salam, a former Egyptian army officer who had been doing undercover work for the FBI, was the man who actually built the bomb. When he was told that he would have to use real bomb-making material instead of harmless substitutes, he became suspicious and began taping his conversations with FBI officials.
Last winter, the FBI was praised for its speed in cracking the case of the World Trade Center bombing and bringing 4 suspects to trial. Now, there is some evidence that the FBI may have known of the plot in advance through an informant and might even have stopped the bombing that killed 6 people.
Notice the media emphasizes that they might have been able to stop it. They then gloss over the fact that the bomb was built by their agent under FBI supervision in conjunction with the district attorney.
FBI agents might have been able to prevent last February's deadly explosion at New York's World Trade Center. They discussed secretly substituting harmless powder for the explosives, but they didn't, according to the FBI's own informant, Imad Salem. Unbeknownst to the FBI at the time, Salem recorded many of his conversations with his handlers.
The actual recording where Salam discusses this with his FBI handler, John Antisev, was released years after the trial.
You got paid regularly for good information. I mean, the expenses were a little bit out of the ordinary, and it was really questioned. Don't tell Nancy I told you this.
Well, I have to tell her, of course.
Well, then if you have to, you have to.
Yeah, because, I mean, the lady was being honest, and I was being honest, and everything was submitted with a receipt.
Yeah.
And now it's questionable.
It's not questionable. It's like a little out of ordinary.
Okay.
You know.
All right. I don't think it was. If that's what you think, guys, fine. But I don't think that, because we was start already building the bomb, which is went off in the World Trade Center. It was built by supervision from the Bureau and the GA, and we was all informed about it, and we know that the bomb start to be built. By who? By your confidential informant. What a wonderful, great case.
So, I mean, there it is. There's the nuts. And I just want everybody to understand what I just showed you. And even then,
mainstream news too. Mainstream news, not any like, you know, like obscure, like YouTube, PeerTube, live leak. No, it's mainstream news.
Well, let's talk about the mainstream, because you notice how they tried to gloss over that recording. They didn't release the recording. That came out years after, but they let you, they obfuscate it by saying they suggested they were going to use harmless powder instead of actual explosives. They don't say, by the way, they built the bomb. You notice that they just we were going to substitute those powder. And it's like, wait a minute, what we substitute? What are you talking about? So they obfuscate, even in the mainstream media then, that their own guy built the bomb that killed all of those people. Start thinking for yourselves. Folks, even when they were building this anti-militia narrative, okay, God forbid you have a Second Amendment, you have to understand they had informants at Elohim City, and that if you watch the whole film, Invisible Empire, free on Rockfin later today, just make the free account already. I mean, what are you waiting for? You watch it and you realize that more than likely McVeigh was Black Ops himself, but you had other FBI informants at Elohim City anyway. And then you had federal agents who didn't show up that day. And then you had other federal agents who blew the whistle on them. And then, I mean, again, watch the film on video, Magnus. I can't stress how corrupt this is. On video, you see them take away more than one explosive. Remember, it's only supposed to be a truck bomb out of the building. Then they get the governor, Frank Keating, on the phone, who has spoken to the ATF. And he admits they have taken at least 2 other explosive devices out of the building, and no federal agents showed up that day. And others testified that they got paged that, first of all, they were running drills that day. And then they got paged not to come in the morning at the offices where it happened. I mean, this is disturbing. I understand it sounds like some kind of terrible plot from a bad Bruce Willis film you might have missed. It is reality, okay? And what is the scariest is all through this, what happened? You saw an escalation of the security state and giving them more and more resources and more ability to out and out lie to you and then classify this. I mean, again, none of it's new. COINTELPRO goes back so much farther. But, you know, the reason I guess that I haven't honed in on 9/11, and there's a lot there as well, is because that's what I'm best known for. But people have to realize it wasn't just a one-off. And I'm not just some crazy person. I'm a beauty school dropout. I don't have a nice little PhD. They don't get me done up in makeup and I wear a suit and I'm on TV every day. But I will show you those people making startling admissions so you don't have to go to some, you know, obscure website. I hate to do your own research, but really, I'm not that bright. You could do what Jason Bermas does.
Yeah, you could just like type any of these events into Google and scroll far enough and you'll find somebody breaking it down. And that's why you mentioned the militia thing. That's why I was going to mention my favorite case of the FBI and the DEA and the ATF doing something surreal. The Viper militia in Arizona in 1995. This isn't a super well-known story, but this is actually pretty important to the Wolverine Watchman thing. So in 1995, all of a sudden in the news, it popped out that the Arizona police had arrested this militia that was planning to kidnap governors, blow up government buildings, were collecting a whole bunch of arms to declare war on the New World Order and everything. This was 1995, after Waco and everything. It came out during the trial, literally like the moment they took it to trial, it started falling apart. It wasn't even a militia. They didn't describe themselves as that. The Vipers only had 2 bolt-action World War II rifles. The bomb that they had been blamed to blow up was a police training exercise that they admitted to doing afterwards. And there's so many details in that case that are so funny. And my favorite one is that the FBI informant that they sent into the Vipers to sting them had, like, this is in the documentation of the court. He had pushed for them to add white supremacist literature to their official literature so many times that he almost blew his cover. And it was voted down by the Vipers unanimously every time. But this guy kept coming back and being like, hey, we should add Mein Kampf. And they're like, no. And he kept doing it to the point where they almost snuffed him out as a Fed. And they tried to bury these guys over nothing. And even to this day, they still make claims about like, oh, they had 100 pounds of tannerite. Like, no, this guy had a small bag of regular fertilizer. And they tried to say that they were amassing like explosives.
Well, let's stop for a second on the tannerite. How come when somebody who is making crazy claims, we have all the footage in the world on, right? Does the FBI and then law enforcement lie about? And I'm talking about Las Vegas when he has 40 pounds of tannerite in his truck downstairs after the fact, right? Because he actually has some kind of tie. Like, for instance, I don't know if you know this, but afterwards, his brother ended up getting arrested for child pornography.
Yeah,
absolutely. And his wife was already overseas. He was obviously there with at least one prostitute as they saw, his bills. They knew his movements already. He had moved so many weapons in. I mean, so many things were dirty about that. And then, it took so long for the majority, I don't think all, they censored some of the body cam footage came out. And so much of it was bizarre, including the fact that you had that worker that went on Ellen and then said he didn't want to be disturbed, who said he had been shot, right? And then you realize in the video he hadn't been shot. He's like walking around the background. So when there is some kind of weird connection that might be federal, it's obfuscated. And let me explain why the feds are not your friends. Here's another great example. I'm a big proponent that people don't understand how bad the system is. So we live in 2021. A lot of people want to go liberal or conservative, or I'm voting Republican or this party or anywhere overseas. We still have royal bloodlines on the planet. Like, just so everybody knows, there are still pretty big, large ceremonies of people that wear crowns, or in Saudi Arabia have certain garments. They're protected by their governments. There are budgets. They're allowed to lie to you. All these things still happen. Okay. And I think that's an important aspect, and they have been covered up by the FBI forever. So there's a document that I've been going to a lot, but there's a guy named Lord Mountbatten. Now, Lord Mountbatten, he was the uncle of Prince Charles. He's his favorite uncle, liked him a lot. And there's an FBI memo from back in the day that they knew that he was actually a pedophile and he was known as Lord Mountbottom, and that he had a perversion for young boys. Now, eventually, Lord Mountbatten is killed on his boat. One of his houseboys is there, by the way, and killed with him. I believe one of his nephews might have been there as well. It was a weird situation, and I think they blamed the IRA. But they never outed him. This was a memo that was classified long after his death, right? This guy's death. And, you know, it's one of those things were they using it to compromise him? Was it kind of intel on how they could maybe not compromise him, but in a certain situation, entice him, right? Get him to do something that they wanted. And they certainly didn't make it public and arrest him and say, hey, he's a bad guy.
Right.
And
we have that same thing happening now with the Julian Assange case, where their key informant in that was someone who got busted for diddling kids, and they used that to go after WikiLeaks.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, we could even extend it into, you know, this main case with Michigan now. You know, if you can't just bring one informant in, and it looks like multiple were working with the FBI, right? You have a lot of compromised individuals. I mean, I'm sure you know a lot of veterans that have sketchy pasts, that, you know, have this charge or that charge, or might be on parole or need this. And at some point, they may become an informant. And at that point, you know, they're going to be utilized as a tool, you know, and those tools can, you know, again, be, hey, we're just going to bring somebody in out of the blue and he's going to start suggesting things. Or now we're not only going to have that person, but we're going to have 2 or 3 others that are just going to kind of slightly go along with this. And we won't push them as hard, but we'll suggest that they go along with this person's views. You know what I mean? And eventually, you know, just enough people say the wrong thing when we're going to get that Whitmer. Yeah, we are. Like, you know, they cling a beer, and yes, they are. And someone's got a bug on, or someone's willing to testify, or all of them are willing to testify, right? Because 4 out of 8 of them are federal informants or whatever.
Yeah, it was the number of people involved in the case was 14, and 10 of them were federal informants.
Exactly. That you know, that's my point. So, like, out of the 10 of 10, you know, how many were hardcore working in the FBI and other cases? Probably not all 10. Maybe 1, 2, maybe even 3, right? But how many got compromised along the way because of their past or something stupid they did? Like, you don't also know how cocky gun owners can be.
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to go out on the farm.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's why they love militias. And I think is an important thing to keep in mind, because the detail about COINTELPRO that I think most people overlook is they understand the infiltration, they understand the arrests, they understand even the assassinations. But there's whole parts of COINTELPRO that are about using this peer pressure and this manufactured consent to get people to do things. And just like you said, they'll take one guy who's like a hardcore dude and he'll success something crazy. But then you'll have 2 guys that aren't as hardcore and they'll be like, well, that's kind of crazy, but you have a point. And then they might even have a 4th guy that's like, I'm not really on board, but I'll hear you out. And you're the 5th guy there, like watching this go on, and you think this is an organic conversation, but it's not, you know? Oh, somebody's calling me.
And not only organic conversation, but just in passing, you might just be like, well, I guess, fellas. And there it is. They got him, you know?
Right.
And they have no viewpoint whatsoever. And the other thing is, again, you're sure you've been out. A lot of these guys like to drink, you know, and look, I've been around people that have been in the military that even have done, you know, the Merc thing after, and there is a certain bravado for those that gravitate towards that. You know what I mean? And they also, there's also kind of a feeling of almost invincibility. Oh, they can come and take it and this and that. And especially when you get under the influence of alcohol or drugs or whatever, just the slightest slip up can put you in a very vulnerable place where you're like, holy fuck, I can't believe I said that. And they got it on tape. And now it's like, dude, you know, I got a family. There's a lot of ways to compromise people. You'd
be amazed how many things you say over the course of your entire life that you would think are totally benign in the moment, but look really bad in a courthouse. And if that's just an average person, let alone if you're an activist, like a militia person, or you're like, you know, God knows.
Brother, I'll tell you what, I went to, you know, I let's just say I had to go get a service done, because I don't even want to say what it is and give the guy away. I had to go get a service done. And I come in, and for something, I said something about probably mask mandates or something around that they were trying to pull on the kids or whatever. And the guy goes, I just think we should just go grab them all and hang them up on the hill. I'm like, whoa, buddy. Whoa. And this isn't somebody that's got a gun. I mean, literally, it's something that you would go and get done, kind of like an oil change or whatever.
Right.
You know what I mean? And this is just somebody you talk to for 2 minutes, and they're saying shit like that. And I'm like, I don't think you get it, partner. You're saying shit like that, and your little magic device is logging every time you're saying something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, even you, you could turn up in a court trial 2 weeks later, and they'd be like, Jason Bermas was in a room with a man that said that, blah blah blah, and it's crazy stuff like that, and even stuff that you think is really benign, you could be like, man, I'll die before I ever put another mask on. What? That's just a statement. That could be in a court case, and they'll be like, this shows that he's a clearly violent, desperate individual. And lawyers will twist the truth into whatever they need it to be, especially federal lawyers. And a lot of people don't get that's how they get a lot of these guys. I mean, I was reading through, I went back to October and everything of the old articles on Watchmen before this came out. Mm-hmm. And they were using stuff like, oh, they were bikers. And they were skeptical of vaccines. And they were using all these little details that you would think are benign, but they use it to craft this narrative of this dangerous far right dude. But I guess we can get into it now.
Well, you know what? I'm glad. Listen, let's talk about FBI stuff and entrapment and craziness and even arming yourself, right? When I was in Texas, when I worked for InfoWars well over a decade ago, there was this knockoff place of Hooters called Twin Peaks that I used to go to.
All right, we got one of those here.
Yeah, listen, not classy at all. Place I could watch the UFC. I'm lowbrow. I used to enjoy it. Food's not great, but whatever. If you remember, 4 or 5 years ago now, there was some kind of a biker gang entrapment case with the FBI that led to a massive shootout. People died, FBI agents, members of the gang. It was inside Twin Peaks and went into the parking lot. I want to say at least 3 or 4 people died, maybe even more than that. They rounded up more than a baker's dozen, Magnus. I'm sure of it. All of them got off. They dropped the charge on every single one of them for the shit that went down. And I mean, how many people had to die because of this thing that they were trying to do? That, listen, I'm not even saying the biker gang was great. You know what I mean? And maybe it was a legitimate sting, but what were they probably moving? Drugs. Again, if you get to be a certain caliber of citizen and you get to manufacture them in a laboratory and put a brand on them like Pfizer, apparently you peddle whatever drug you want. You know what I'm saying? But no. So, the moral high ground isn't there. And I'm not pushing that stuff either. I think that, a lot of these people, it is more than drugs. You end up trafficking humans, right? All these things are kind of in relation. We do need law enforcement. I'm not an anarchist by any means. I think we've had that discussion a little bit before. But we have to have criminal accountability for these agencies. And the FBI, guys, that's the tip of the iceberg. That's what people don't understand. I think I talked about signature reduction the last time we were on that panel, but I mean,
they're hidden army, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it doesn't even have a term. Signature reduction is an art form, but it is a hidden army. It has 60,000 operational people using domestic and foreign fake identities, DARPA tech, you name it.
And you hear that story and you're like, that's crazy. And then you go back to the Whitmer case where 10 out of 14 people were federal agents, and you start going, whoa, which is why I named this episode All My Friends Are Feds, because there's a chance. It sounds absurd, but there's a legit chance of that. The amount of the scope and scale of these federal agencies is something we can't even comprehend, because we know all these stories of this, things the FBI has stopped, and then we know the legit things. And then we know the stories of all the things that are sketchy, like we've been talking about. How many operations are going on right now where some dude was almost entrapped and they spent $10,000 to try to get a guy to do something, and then he just didn't do it and the op falls apart? Probably uncountable.
I think a ton, but your 10 grand, I think you're being extremely generous. Because these are the type of things that end up having an economic black hole, right? That's another thing that really bothers me is right now you're kind of outwardly seeing inflation happen because of all these checks going on, but there is no financial accountability, just like there is no criminal accountability for these people as well. I mean, I guess more and more people have seen it in the last couple of years via things like the Wiener laptop and now the Biden laptop, a lot of laptops going around. But the problem is that they're able to put that into a partisan box, right? So one will scream Russian fake news, I'm so brainwashed I don't want to look at it, and the other will scream MAGA gonna save me, white hats on the internet, let's go. Right? And really it's like, wait, let's take a step back, guys. It's not just their laptops. Okay, the Department of Justice not only knows about that, but they know about Barney Frank running an underage brothel out of his DC apartment back in the 80s and 90s that was connected to Chevy Chase Middle School and the vice principal there. Front page news. Anybody can look into it. They also know that Dennis Hassert had a long history of molesting boys from before he got politics and somehow became the Speaker of the House. They also know that Mark Foley, who ended up just going into rehab, had a sexting page scandal with 15-year-old boys after going on Chris Hansen Have a Seats show and championing and being the lead of the legislation that was going to be tough on pedophiles.
Yeah.
Okay. So guys, it's not new. Just like these plots are not new, covering up for high-level pedophilia. We went all the way back to Lord Mountbatten, right, for royalty. And again, just so everybody knows, Dennis Hassert, not royalty, but apparently, gets similar treatment. Oh, he's an old man in a wheelchair. We'll give him 18 months after a judge calls him a serial child molester. And you can't make this shit up. So if that didn't let you know that you weren't getting justice, there are those little springs of false hope, Magnus, right? Like he went to jail and then they arrested Epstein. And even I'll never forget it. I'm sitting there watching UFC with my brother next to me. And I'm just so damned excited that Epstein's been arrested. I can't believe it. I've been talking about this thing well over a decade, right? Like kicking and screaming and people just like laughing in my face. And they arrest him. And I'm sitting there, I take out my phone. I never do that in my living room or whatever. And I go live and my brother's sitting next to me. He's like, well, he goes, they're going to kill him.
Right. We all knew. That's the crazy thing. And it's the same, to tie it back to the Watchmen thing. I literally watched that go down and I was like, that's bullshit. I don't believe that. It sounds Hollywood. And now the more details that come out, the more yep. And we all knew it. There was people in that moment. And the same thing with Epstein, same thing with all of this. We knew what was going to happen. I mean, John McAfee was so aware of it that he literally got it tattooed on his arm that he wouldn't kill himself. So we all know.
See, that one's tough for me because I'm not saying that he killed himself. I'm not saying he didn't. Obviously, his wife has now come out, but I will say that he looked so fucking rough after, being in, I think he was in custody 6 or 7 months. You know what I mean? And look, all I'm saying is in that situation, when you are in a South American jail where it is, or I think he was in Spain, right? He wasn't, I won't say South America. He was in Spain. Excuse me. A jail like that, they obviously aren't feeding you as much. You can see it in your weight. There's much less accountability. Now, you would think, again, we don't live in a banana republic or a second or third world nation or one as corrupt as Spain. Right. You would think. But you see what happened to Epstein, where literally they had El Chapo in his own wing under watch all the time, and the guy didn't kill himself twice, right? And there's no accountability there. Whereas, Epstein didn't have to go through 6 or 7 months of real torture, at all. He was showing up to his court cases. He was talking to his lawyers.
He was allowed to talk to his lawyers.
Yeah, unlike Assange, it wasn't in a glass box at those hearings. I mean, dude, that's the other thing. Things are so twisted that you also had this sect believing that these white hats in the FBI, after all this, in the Department of Justice, Bill Barr, the guy who was named as Robert Johnson in the Iran-Contra scandal, Bill Barr, the guy who worked with Mueller back in the day before he became the youngest attorney general under Bush 1, Bill Barr, the guy who wrote up the paperwork to bring Noriega over, who was our CIA asset during Iran-Contra.
Represented the FBI sniper in Ruby Ridge, pro bono, Bill Barr.
Bill Barr, the guy who said he might have to recuse himself because he worked for Kirkland and Ellis, a firm that had done work for Epstein in the past. That Bill Barr.
Right, like that was a surreal thing. Like before we get on to going through the Watchmen case, we were gonna do next. Was getting into arguments with these Trumpers about like, oh, Bill Barr's the guy, and particularly militia dudes. And I'm like, wait, you don't know who Bill Barr is, do you? I'm like, no. I'm like, look into Waco, look into Ruby Ridge, look what name pops up around those two events. And their minds were blown. I'm like, yeah, guys, like no, he's not on your team. He's not gonna lock her up. He's not gonna prosecute. Like, no, he's not on your team, bro. I'm sorry.
Same thing with like Pompeo. When they had Pompeo, not only the lie, cheat, and steal, laugh it up guy, but I'll never forget it because I was working with We Are Change at the time, and I was trying to get a passport. I think it was Bilderberg 2018. It must have been.
Is that the one where Luke ran like right into it?
Luke's been a lot of them, man. Like, that's how I got back. And props to Luke for all the work he's done over the years. But 2017, I went because it was in Chantilly, Virginia. I was just so disappointed on who showed up, how many people were there. It was my introduction to the world of Jack Posobiec, who was there. And like, I had just run into Lee Stewie, who worked with Dan Dix of Press for Truth. I'd known him forever. So it was good to see him there. But then I guess Tim Pool was there the day before and he left, and the Dollar Vigilante was there and he had left, and InfoWars didn't even show up. And there were like these weird CNN is ISIS chants. And I'm like, guys, just so everybody understands, there's 5 representatives for Trump in there, including Peter Thiel, who is his technology advisor and on the board. And like Liddell had just been hired. He was there. I think McMaster was there. And there were 2 other people there. And it was just like a big wake up call, like, holy shit, this thing is getting co-opted. We're in a bad place. So I didn't get my passport in time. I think this was in Sweden. I'm almost sure that's where it was. And Pompeo didn't show up the first day, but C-SPAN, anybody go to cspan.org and check this out. Just type in like Mike Pompeo Bilderberg. He shows up. And C-SPAN like walks him through this 30-minute journey where he's getting on a boat with the rest of Bilderberg, which includes Jared Kushner, who's there, right? And Trump's son-in-law, where they're taking a private yacht to a castle where Mike Pompeo is going to give a speech on Iran and foreign policy. And I'm like, you're like literally the representative of the imperialists is marching toward a private yacht with the Predator class and their minions to give a speech at a castle, bro. At a castle of how we should bomb the fuck out of who and when and why.
Like if Hollywood wasn't co-opted as hell, these would be stories where they would be like, we can't make a movie about this. No one would believe it was real. Because it's so absurd. It's
on tape. Like it's like the Pompeo tour as he walks towards this pier at the end, and you see all these rich people on the boat. And I remember, and I'm just like, I was already upset with 2017 and kind of like the InfoWars coverage or whatever. You know what I mean? I was like, this is just, you got to be kidding me here. And David Knight did show up, and I think Schroyer ended up showing up because Luke tweeted something out and whatever. But then there was really no mention the next year too. And I remember me and Rob Dew went back and forth a little bit on Twitter. And it was because I'm like, dude, Pompeo's giving speeches at a castle. Like,
what else do you have to add?
Yeah, what else do I need to say? Right. Like, and it's, those guys, listen, I'm glad InfoWars exists, and I just had Alex Jones on, and I hope to bring him to Rockfin and all that good stuff, right?
Didn't he just get on Rockfin? thought that was the word.
He's talking about it. I just had him on, and he said he was going to do it. He's on vacation. I really hope that they do, because I think it'll bring more people to the platform. And look, we do need an alternative voice, but they held out hope for Barr or Durham, and like went with like this Roger Stone light narrative a lot of times, where, look, I don't think Stone should have fucking went to prison for what he did. I don't think he committed any crime there, but he's also the godfather of fucking lobbying. Like, one of the major things that we would have to get rid of if we wanted a constitutional republic, I mean, the practice of interjecting people with large amounts of money to go bribe officials, essentially, both outwardly and then behind the scenes. Like, when I say outwardly, they're like, well, we can give you this on your campaign if you take this position. You know, we'd love to get behind you, but we need you. I mean, it's outward. And then the backdoor deal of these people that get out of politics after 4 years or 8 years, or have just had it, who do you think they end up working for? The lobbyists for like 7, sometimes 7, 8 figure fucking contracts, right? Like, come on, man. And so Stone has a lot to answer for. I got like 1 second. I shouldn't say 1 second. I got 2 questions in with him on the Union of the Unwanted Ones. And I hit him on Bolton, you know, another ghoul that was in that administration. Another reason that you should realize that Donald Trump and company aren't coming to save you. And this whole getting behind Trump in 2024. Yeah, they fucked him. Yeah, he totally won the last election. Yeah, they're still lying to you in the media. Yeah, they tried to demonize him for things he wasn't. That doesn't make him a great person.
Yeah, so like that's all. I get into the same thing. I use the example of like Kristi Noem in up in the Dakotas.
Yeah,
like, yeah, Kristi Noem, I'm super happy that you didn't go along with the lockdowns, but you like that. I can support you for that. But you also like vetoed a marijuana legalization bill, so it doesn't make you a great person. Like, you know, here. All right, so I moved to Iowa, right? But I'm also like literally on the border of Illinois. So when I say that, I mean I can jump my car and in 6 minutes I'm over in Illinois. Over there, you know, weed is completely legal. Completely. I mean, when I say legal, you can go to a shop and just gut it. You don't need a medical thing. All of it. There's very lax laws. Here, it's still illegal. And yet over there, they're going to mask their kids up. Over here, we're not. And I got to say that my governor did do something really great with the Second Amendment, saying with a permit or not, you can open carry or conceal carry, whatever you want. You guys did the constitutional carry, right? Yeah. And what was it? Iowa that did the we're not going? It was what? No, it was a different state that did the we'll arrest federal agents if they try to implement gun control. One of the states did that. I'm not sure if that was Iowa or not, but I listen. She's been very vocal that she's not going to go with any more of these mandates or lockdowns, and I'm really and she banned those masks statewide for kids. That's a big move. She needs to get better at it. We can't have these localized mandates. Look, either you have authority over your body or not, and you can mask it as a policy or privatize because of work. But that's not what it is at all. I mean, look at these federal mandates and saying, oh, well, you have the out if you want to be tested every 2 weeks or something like that. No, I don't need to go through a medical procedure because you tell me. That also sets an extremely terrible precedent. So, you know, unfortunately, man, you know how I feel right now. We're balls deep in a real takeover. You know, this is not a soft takeover anymore. They've already beta tested a lot of the technology overseas, and they are mobilizing agencies like the FBI against the general populace. Because when you get into white supremacy, when you get into the disinformation dozen, right, the thing they're talking about now with vaccines, it's not just about vaccines. It's about ivermectin. It's about masks. It's about anything against the narrative. By the way, it's not just white supremacy. Oh, we've got Louis Farrakhan in there. You know, Riza Islam brings him up. So now it's black supremacy. Well, yeah, I mean, that included everything. Veganism, like animal rights, whatever they want. Environmentalism. And like, that's why I like to bring it up. So for like the last like 30 minutes, we're going to go of like tying it back to the Watchman thing. It's really important to understand that the FBI is going to be used to target all of these issues. They're going to bring up things. They're like any group that forms. Let's say there's a anti-second lockdown like group that forms. They want to go protest. The FBI is going to immediately go after them. And the reason why I know that is because with the with the Wolverine Watchman case, a lot of people leave out this detail, but they first came onto the scene in the anti-lockdown protests in Michigan. That's why they were targeted. Like, we have 100 militias in this state. They don't go after the militias, but those guys showed up to the Capitol to protest the lockdown mandates. And that's immediately what they went after. So I kind of want to get like when did you first become aware of like the Watchman story? And was there anything like you noticed right off the bat?
I had Whitney Webb on the week it happened. The week it happened, Whitney Webb was on. We said that this is a federal operation. I mean, you can go.
I need to go watch that because
I guarantee if you just type in Whitney Webb on my YouTube channel and you go, I think it's got to be the week it happened. And I said, we talked about it for a second. I go, I think at the time already at least one or two of them had been outed as federal informants. It wasn't 10 or something like that at the time, but immediately I said the plot was sketchy. And I think I also pointed to the fact that the sheriff had come out and basically backed these guys and said, you know, these are actually good people. I know some of them. I had spoken at one of the rallies that they had that was anti-lockdown, right? And the other thing was that I was calling for the great resistance to the great reset, which I still am, which I am now warning people that if you do not act now, you're going to have to take these measures I'm about to discuss, but you might not even have that measure. What am I talking about? A lot of these localized boards, whether it be county or otherwise, went totally remote and totally digital, right? But some of them still had, masks and people could come and speak. I urged people to go in peacefully and storm the capitals, not, with force. I mean, this is pre-January 6th. I said localized capitals, but I said not only to go there, but you had to stay there. You had to say, you know what? You want us to work from home. You want us to work remotely. We'll set up Wi-Fi hotspots and we'll just hang back. And this is the people's house. And we're going to work from here. And we're not leaving until all the restrictions are gone. Not just some. We want the emergency use authorization of everything over. Every authoritarian measure. We call it the March 2020 Act. Before 2 weeks to slow the spread. No compromises. And then we'll leave afterwards. Maybe you get to keep your jobs. Right? That's what I was calling for. And I had seen a few people go into Idaho. And I think it was the Idaho County or whatever, somewhere in there. And effectively get legislation passed that was supposed to overturn it. And then I believe the governor just used another executive order, right? So
that's what they did in Michigan too, is the Michigan Supreme Court, the Michigan House, and the Michigan Senate, all over like a course of 2 months, I think it was like a 2/3 majority in every single department, ruled her emergency orders as unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. And yet we still have a lockdown to this day.
So again, at what point do these authoritarians get arrested for their criminal actions? Because that's what these are.
Careful, because you might get arrested by the FBI like the Watchmen. That's essentially what they said.
All I'm saying is
no, I get what you're saying.
Well, at what point does it happen that these are obviously criminal actions and these authoritarian dictates have never held up? They haven't held up in any court yet. They act like they are. All the fact checkers in big tech, tells you that all these authoritarian dictates, like, they can demand a passport while you move. They can demand you do this at your work. They aren't liable. It's just, listen, it was legal to put people on trains, and it wasn't just Jews, okay? And it wasn't just gypsies, and it wasn't just dissidents. It was every undesirable person that they felt was a threat.
What was the? I always butcher the quote, but it's like first they started with the artists, and it doesn't mention race until the end of that. It's all occupations and Well,
people don't get it because, popularized history makes the Holocaust about certain. It's just like everything right now is a buzz term, right? It's safe and effective. It's a pandemic of the unvaccinated, right? And then the things that have been attached to the Holocaust, it's Nazis, Jews, Hitler, 6 million people died, right? Those are all the things. Now, I would argue that more than likely, more than 6 people, especially if you went to people beyond camps, were absolutely exterminated and extinguished. And it wasn't just Jews, right? It was people that opposed them politically. Again, it was the mentally retarded, gays, people that weren't socially acceptable. They were very anti-Mason at the time too. Anybody also that stepped up and challenged their narrative during their power struggle. There was not a lot of that going on. And they were literally, it made it legal to have your papers, please. And it was generalized, right? Just like you're hearing white supremacist or extremist or terrorist, Jew at the end of it became the big thing, right? Das Juden and the yellow star and the mark. But they did this to a lot of people. And that's the thing. It's just like, I'm not a big, I don't know how much of my stuff you watch, Magnus, but I don't make it.
No, I've known about you for a long time.
I've never made it about identity politics or somebody's sexual preference. I don't like the sexualization of children on any level. And I don't like bigotry and racism on any level either, right? And I don't think that any racial or religious group controls the world, okay? I think there are interests in a multitude of different religious institutions and states for sure, right? And influence and all that other stuff. But, those are the two things I don't focus on, because the new civil rights movement has been here for a long time. And they don't care if you're black, white, Hispanic, Asian. They don't care what you like to fuck. They don't care. They don't fucking care, man. They don't care if you got fucking $10 in the bank, you got 10,000, you got 100,000, you got 10 million. You're nothing to them. You're nothing to them. Even you people out there that are in the upper middle class with all these businesses, haven't you noticed they're trying to crush you too? They are. So we should all be on this same page of, no matter how we're voting, realizing whether you're on a subsistence living, it's not the guy with 5 car dealerships that fucking you over, right? It's not that guy. And then on the other flip side, that car dealer has to realize it's not the guy on Skid Row that's fucking you over. All right.
And like we had a whole panel about the not a private company thing. The mega corporations are not your friends either. But like, I always do this bit because it's so good, and I know you'll love it. But I'm gonna describe a situation with no context, and we're gonna see if you can identify what it is. So there was an event that happened where a bunch of individuals, very upset with the government, showed up outside of a government building. They marched up to it. They were temperature checked and then allowed into the building by the police. And then weeks later, it was called an insurrection. Am I talking about January 6th or the Michigan State Capitol?
I'm going to go with Michigan State Capitol for Alex.
Yes, and that was the Watchman. Literally, like, it's funny because I pulled up an article from December where they said that the Watchman tried to storm the building. I have friends that were there. They literally got temperature checked by state troopers, and they're like, "All right, guys, you can go in." And they tried to use it as a violent storming. And there's a very important detail there, because the head of the FBI Detroit field office that ran point and handled all of the informants and everything in the Wolverine Watchman case, I think it was in either December or November, was transferred to Washington, D.C., and is currently involved with the January 6th event. Whoa. Who would have imagined?
I just can't imagine. Here's the thing, man. And the other thing is, you look at, I'm not a proud boy. I didn't even really know that the Boogaloo Boys existed, Magnus. I didn't know that it was even like a real thing other than like outside of a meme at one point. I remember the first time I was introduced to it and I'm like, is this really a thing? Is this something that's being popularized by the media? Is this a movement? What is this? And to me, it's like we live in such a wacky universe that when you peel back the layers, like let's get into it. So Joe Biggs, right? He's a guy that's worked for InfoWars for years. He's an ex-military guy. He apparently at somewhere along the line was an FBI informant. Now it seems like that stuff was working for InfoWars. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't involve his work there. Maybe it did involve his work with the Proud Boys. Maybe it didn't. I don't know. You know what I mean? But like when you have those individuals that are so compromised, for instance, you got Otario. I didn't even know who he was, Magnus. So I was.
Yeah, he did just like materialize out of the fucking ether. Like I couldn't tell you where that dude came from.
I knew about the Proud Boys, and I knew about Gavin McInnes, and I knew Gavin McInnes had helped start Vice. When these people pop up again, 2017, I started learning about all this stuff and who they were. And, I didn't know about Rebel Media. It was my reintroduction to the new wave of alt media and what was being called the alt-right at this point and what they were discussing. And a lot of it was frightening to me because, it was kind of promoting this idea of people are coming to save you. Maybe there are these indictments, so Podesta's going to get arrested, all these like cartoon world things when these people have been in power for so goddamn long. And when you see these people, it's just like, how do you get across the Magnus that much of it's infiltrated, but not everybody, right? So we talk about like Biggs. I interviewed him in December when they were marching and the non-Antifa event went. They actually got pulled off of YouTube. But it was, I interviewed Otario at the same time. I think it was Kara Castronova who pointed me out. I asked him about this. He said it was all about love. We were talking about him hugging people. I made it about love. And the next thing you know, in January, he supposedly has weapons right after, meeting with Trump in the White House. He is working with the FBI. He's not working with the FBI. It's pretty crazy. And it's like, at one level, I know that we need to organize against these people, right? But it seems like, again, you look at 14 people they arrest in Michigan and 10 of them are federal informants. I mean, if you've got 50 people in a room, how many of them are compromised and working with the authorities on some level? Is that a bad question to ask? Because it's not like you're going to know who the Fed is.
Yeah, and like we discussed, their tactics might be to have a Fed who acts so low-key and benign that it almost doesn't matter that they are a Fed. But they're still pushing something slowly and deliberately. But it gets even worse because then you consider the fact that in the COINTELPRO leaks, it showed that one of their tactics was Fed jacketing or cop jacketing, where they'd have a federal informant accuse someone else in the movement of being a federal informant to help it break it up and fall apart. And that's what they did to the Black Panthers, was a whole bunch of Fed jacketing. And I think it was Fred Hampton's number 3 guy or whatever came out to be a federal informant. And there was this long documented history of him going to other Black liberation groups and starting fights with them and everything and accusing them of being federal agents when he was a federal agent, which I have that meme. I probably don't have time to pull it up, but it's just a picture of a CIA agent behind a computer screen. He's like, "You're dividing the movement, bro." It's how it goes. So it is tricky. And I definitely, it's hard to answer how we deal with it, because I know my movement is infested to the gills because almost every single instance of one of us being arrested involves a federal informant. So it's yeah. And obviously Anonymous was filled to the brim with feds, as we learned with the WikiLeaks thing and all that. And every militia, Antifa likes to pretend they're not full of feds. I doubt it.
So any of those groups, it doesn't even have to be the ones that you know about. Again, when there's a decent amount of people that are meeting with one another, there's probably somebody that's compromised, especially if you're advertising out into the open ether. You go back as far as, say, Fahrenheit 9/11, when Michael Moore was showing you a bunch of old people that were having tea and cupcakes, and there was a dozen of them, and they had a federal informant in there. And this is something that goes back almost 20 years. So this is common practice. They've been more and more emboldened. It is upsetting. And you talk about Fed jacking. I also want to point out, especially because we talked a little bit about the high level pedophilia, and we talked a little bit of what, would become the quote unquote QAnon sense movement. You have somebody like Ted Gunderson. Are you familiar with Ted Gunderson?
The name's familiar, but I have so many of these awful stories in my head. I can't connect the name to the story.
So Ted Gunderson was the head of the FBI in LA.
Oh, okay.
And he actually was the head of COINTELPRO at the time in the 60s in that area, where obviously that was a hotbed, right? That's where a lot of the action was happening over on the West Coast, and especially in California, in that greater Los Angeles area where you had, so much culture going on. Now, he ends up coming in to play as the guy that brings out a lot of the Franklin scandal stuff through Paul Bonacci and another guy named John DeCamp. Now, John DeCamp is a state senator in Nebraska, but he also was military psychological operations while he was in Vietnam. Okay, you can actually, John DeCamp, if you want, you can go to like the Vanderbilt archives and find, like that's what he was doing. He was a lawyer also. And I'm not doubting a lot of the weird, obviously I did a video today on the Bohemian Grove, right? On the weird occult stuff. And obviously the Abramovich stuff is there and all that. But they took a lot of it to the next level where SRA became that kind of satanic panic that you saw in the 80s and 90s. And Gunderson was he's on the Geraldo talk show with Michael Aquino. And I actually met Gunderson before he died, interviewed him for like an hour, hung out with him for a day because I wanted to get a feel for him. At that point, it was weird because I don't know whether he was just losing it or he was an opportunist, but like it seemed like every conversation he's a Satanist. He is a Satanist. Satanist here, Satanist there. So, you get a different perspective a lot of the time when you run into these guys in person than you would otherwise. Some of the facade falls away and you realize this person's human like me and they can make a mistake. And that's another thing, man. Are these federal informants just people that made mistakes and got compromised, or are they nefarious? Or do they have an objective? Are they looking for a paycheck? A lot of the times they are opportunities. They are looking for paychecks, but they're not nefarious, or it's a combination. It's just like everybody wants to accuse Alex Jones of being a Fed, right? Alex Jones is a faith-controlled opposition. He's a Zionist, Mossad agent, Vatican, shape-shifting werewolf.
Yep.
Yeah.
Heard it all.
Bill
But I've also heard that about you. So it's ridiculous. It's so ridiculous.
It's hard for me because, I don't, it's not like me and Alex have had a huge personal relationship the last decade, but there was a time. So I do have kind of like an inside view of, I saw a lot of his growth too while I was there. I also had an inside view on a lot of the players that have made it for a long time, people like the Health Ranger and, a lot of the behind the scenes baseball that I'm sure that you're becoming more and more accustomed to in these weird worlds of bizarreness and infighting that I've never really had time for, right? But that there's kind of like these inner workings of politics behind the scenes. So you end up taking a grain of salt here and there and everywhere. And I'll even, because Glenn Greenwald has been really outspoken about this Michigan militia, at least as far as mainstream news and having a reach in that genre.
Yeah, they even talked about it on Rogan, which was like great.
Absolutely. And, I'm glad you brought up Rogan because Rogan has elevated a lot. I met Joe, and Joe was the first guy to buy Loose Change in bulk in DVDs when it came out. Loose Change second edition, he bought a 10-pack. I'll never forget it. He was the first guy, Joe Rogan at joerogan.net. While we were selling all these DVDs, we're like, cool. Thanks, Joe. But he's given a voice to Tim Dillon. Now, not only is Tim Dillon hilarious, but he more and more is covering real issues. And he recently had Glenn Greenwald on, and he asked Greenwald directly about 9/11. And he said, is there something more that, and he's like, well, I'm not implying anything. He did it good. He kind of backed off it. He let Greenwald kind of like do his own thing and almost hang himself with his own words. And Greenwald goes, well, he's like, being a public figure and having a certain level, you kind of have to pick your hills to die on. Right? And I'm like, whoa, this motherfucker's gonna go there, isn't he? Now, again, me knowing some inside baseball back in the day of Occupy Wall Street before Tim Pool was big and Luke was doing his thing. Luke used to talk to Greenwald, behind the scenes quite a bit and like kind of share information. So Greenwald was damn well aware that 9/11 was dirty. And all this is pre-Snowden for everybody that doesn't understand is his big break. He was just writing a lot of anti-war stuff at The Guardian and covering Occupy. And that's why he was down there. So he goes on, he goes, but he quickly changes the subject from hill to die on and what he can and can't talk about. He goes, but you just look at JFK. So immediately he equates 9/11 to JFK and not knowing the truth about that, and that obviously being the obvious conspiracy that the vast majority of us understand. And I thought to myself, you know what? That's why comedy is important.
Yeah, because I love Tim Dillon because he's sneaky. Like he lures these people in with what people think is like lowbrow, just stupid humor, and then all of a sudden he has Whitney Webb on talking about like the Israeli connection with Jeffrey Epstein. It's like, whoa, how did we get from this to that? He's great at that. I love Tim.
Great, and I had no idea who Tim Dillon was, and it's the first time I was ever on Tinfoil Hat with Sam Tripoli. And he had Tim Dillon on, and we actually ended up talking Franklin scandal, all these things. I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, I had no, I'm like, man, this guy is really knows his shit. And so, you know, we DM back and forth every once in a while. And I saw the Greenwald thing, and I just said, hey, man, saw what you did about 9/11 with Greenwald. And I just want to say thank you. Great job. And he said, thanks, man. And that's great to me. It's like, you know, something I did now well over a decade ago has had such an impact that it's still in the zeitgeist where things are able to sneak out, and hopefully more people are understanding. I'm not some jerk off conspiracy theorist. I'm you. I'm fucking you. I'm the guy that wants to, you know, just hang back, have a good time, pop a beer, really not have to think about these things at all, not be bothered with my life, make my living. If I'm not bothering anybody and they're not bothering me, groovy, and just keep moving. But we don't live in that world anymore. We would live in a world of restrictions, lies, hate, murder, coercion. And it's like, who the fuck is going to step up? If it's not me, which is you, who's doing it?
Right. And that's the thing is like so many of these stories, whether it's Tim Pool, whether it's you, whether it's me, like I'm at this position where like Scott Horton was always like, I'm always a giant fan of Scott Horton. I've always loved Jimmy Dore. I've always loved you. The only reason I'm talking to you right now is because I sat the night before I went to a protest on a Google Doc sheet and just mind vomited a speech out onto it and went out there and shakily gave it in front of a camera. Anyone in the chat can do that. Any human being can do that. I am not particularly special. I am not particularly smart. I have a keyboard and that's it. It's the same. It's the same thing with everything. Like you can do this. You can believe in yourself just a little bit more and we can make this happen because I do always, I'm a big critic of hero worship. And I do always get bummed out where I'll hear, you know, just for an example, like, man, if only I could be like as smart as Bermas and show like people as much information as Bermas does. Like you could. Like, what's stopping you? Nothing's stopping you.
Nothing. And that's such a good point, man. It's like, I want people to think of it this way. If you took just a tenth of the energy that you used in the past month to get into arguments on Facebook, right? Or to post memes that aren't yours and then get into shit posting wars or back and forth, just 1/10 of that energy to put something else together in media or otherwise. So I'm not even saying, oh, I put together a video. You could be putting together that group that twice a week or twice a month gets together and does an action, or you could be getting together that group that helps clean up the community or gives food. There's just so many things, or shows up to the school board, right? You said you don't even have to be the person to give the speech. You can be the person with the other 15 people that's behind the person that gives the speech, right? And then you clap and you're like, that's why I'm here. So that's not a lot of energy at all. I'm talking about a piece. If all of you just did that, you know, that's why, man, you just said it. I'm not big on hero worship either. I'm hashtag be your own hero, because at the end of the day, when it all comes to a head, right? And in whatever last moments, days, months, seconds, whatever you have, all you have is what you did on this planet. And if you're not a sociopath, right? If you actually generally care about other people in your life on any level, don't you want to leave them a better world? Don't you want to show them that you were part of the group that stood up, right, in the movie that you watched? Like, which side are you on? Are you Braveheart and a bunch of dudes going, give us our freedom? Or are you the guy up on the thing that's wheeling the goddamn device that's tearing him apart so you get to live the next day? Well, you're going to do that again and again and again with other people until eventually they catch up with you. And then all of a sudden, your last moments, You're thinking about how many people you did that to before you died a meaningless death. That's how I feel about it, man. And, you know, I think human beings are pretty cool, man. I think that we've done some really great things. You know me, I'm not into this whole transhumanism. I'm not into this whole making us and everything we do bad. I think that we could live in a world that's much better for all of us if we put the little differences aside and we got past the propaganda and realized that we do have great power. And probably that's what they fear the most.
Absolutely. Like that, obviously, you know, I'm the big unity guy. And there was a Ford Fisher caught it. There was a BLM activist who went and spoke at the January 6th political torture summit or whatever they did, that protest they did out there for the January 6th people. A BLM activist spoke there and he had a standing ovation. And to connect this to what I'm showing on the screen right now, I'm actually going to try to get a hold of that guy because we're trying to do this little event. You might have heard of it, you know, Jason, of we're trying to have a post-partisan peace march because that's not a thing that happens anymore. The last one was in 2006. Mm-hmm. The last time it wasn't just like a Democratic organization or Republican organization. You had a post-partisan peace march. Show up there. And Scott Horton's going to be speaking and everything. We're trying to get all these people there because I think, just piggybacking off what you said, not only does just showing up to that event, you never know like what effect that's going to have on the world, but you also don't know the connections you're going to make and how that can build. And that's why I consider the unity thing so important, because to just like give a chain of events, one of our guys went to a Virginia BLM protest, met a guy named Jafari Jones. Jafari Jones shows up to a Second Amendment rally as a BLM activist. There's more unity there. Fiorella interviews Jafari Jones, and like you can start seeing how like these unity connections build and how important it is getting people in the same place and talking like this. And that's something anybody can do. You know, I'm definitely not the biggest Steven Crowder fan, but his whole little gimmick of setting up a table, you know, just to create conversations, that's legendary. And I saw people kind of like aping that, to where there was a Julian Assange group that just went and sat a table out with a banner that said "Free Julian Assange," at like with, it didn't say "Ask me anything," but essentially like "Come and talk to us," and they had people walking up to them.
Yeah,
you can go to FedEx, spend $20 on a banner, go get a cheap folding table, go sit out on like a Friday night on your local bar scene, and who knows what will come out of that. There could be change. You could end up in a position that you would never even imagine doing better things from the world just from one little stupid action like that. You think doesn't matter at all.
You're 100% right. And now that we all have these, there's almost less of an excuse not to do it. I'll never forget one of the most powerful points in activism was being able to show evidence on the spot. And I had this LG that was basically a Razor Plus, right? Everybody was into the Razor, but you flipped it and it had a little movable camera, and you could even play 3GP video. 3GP, baby, like 144p, all you could handle. Terrible. So we're out in San Francisco, and we are at this what was the Tea Party. There was a bunch of people dressed up in revolutionary gear, and we had this giant 9/11 Commission report that had holes in it. So, you know, there's 100 or so of us there, and this giant 9/11 Commission thing that we're going to throw into the bay and then pull it out and, you know, kind of represent what had been done at the Tea Party, where they threw the tea over. And you know how you get like those like painted up dancing robot guys, right?
Yeah.
These guys. So one of them comes over to me, starts, what is this, man? What the hell's going on here, bro? So I go, all right, man. So you know that like 2 buildings went down on 9/11. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, do you know a 3rd building, 47 stories, imploded on itself and wasn't hit by a plane? He's like, what are you talking about? And I point over to like a tall building. I'm like, that's what, like 12, 13 stories? He's like, yeah, it's not that much. I'm like, all right. So you get it like 3-4 times that size. He's like, yeah. So I flip my phone up and I play it. And he goes, that happened on 9/11? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, play it again. Play it again. So I play it again. He's like, He's like, damn, son, you're dropping knowledge. He's like, I didn't know that. He shook my hand and he's like, I'm going to go look this stuff up tonight. I told him about the movie where he could watch the whole thing. And it just blew his mind. And that was a powerful thing back then before everybody had a magic box in high definition. You know, you got 4K screens, 90 hertz now.
It's just like the causality of that, because it sounds absurd, like an absurd example, but it could totally be true. That guy could like get super like aware of everything that's going on, and then he could have a kid, and that kid could like grow up like learning all of this, and then that kid could run for a senator, and then all of a sudden like you know Jason's sitting there interviewing this guy that's running like a reopen the 9/11 commission thing, and he'd be like, yeah, my dad taught me about this. Like, oh, who's your dad? And like, oh shit, you know, stuff like that happens, and it's surreal. But we are coming up on time. There's one last subject I really quickly wanted to talk to you, because this is something nobody's talking about, and I'm not even sure if you're aware of it, but I wanted to get your take. Have you heard of a group called Patriot Front?
No.
Okay, so there's this group of these guys are flagrant, like open neo-Nazis.
Oh,
and they've had
they're like Stormfront revisited.
Yes, like they march around the streets yelling "Retake America" and stuff like that. They do flash protests where they show up like 300 deep and march through the streets. And they've done one in DC. And I think like 3 weeks ago, they did one in Washington State, where like 300 neo-Nazis in all matching uniforms with their faces covered appear in a location and do a protest. Now, the media has not shut up about the Proud Boys. The media has not shut up about the Boogaloo Boys. There's like no coverage of Patriot Front, even though there's videos of like these like groups of like 100+ matching uniform neo-Nazis marching through the streets. It's really weird to me that nobody's talking about this, and it makes me suspicious. So I kind of wanted like your like take on like what the hell? Why?
I think what you're looking at, if that's the case, is probably a manufactured outrage position where they don't pay attention to it until they have a slick media narrative and go-to video reel, right? So maybe you get like 4 or 5 of these, and then all of a sudden you get the leader and you're able to tie them to a certain thing, and you have this very base narrative, and then something outrageous can happen where, how did this happen? How did we let this happen? Oh, people actually were looking at them. You know what I mean? But if you're talking about people dressed up with their faces covered, this is my biggest problem. But even before Antifa with the anarchists and the black bloc, I remember going to the G20 in like 2009, is if you're not man enough to show your face and let people know who you are, I don't know how I can trust you. I mean, I want to have conversations with people. I don't want to act threatening, right? And I get it. You know, you're about your privacy and those type of things, but you just invite agent provocateur.
Right. And yeah, I have them on the screen. Like, these are these guys.
Yeah.
And they just show up like this.
Yeah, man.
And it's super weird. And they had one in DC. They had one in Portland. I think there was another one in like Nashville or something. Mm-hmm. And just like silently, besides their marches, they just appear with like apparent. They call them flash protests, but that's surreal because you've been in this whole thing long enough to know that whenever a like right-wing or left-wing group plans a protest, even if they keep it on the hush, they'll show up and there'll be 100 cops there already. Like, that's just,
and not only that, it's tough enough to mobilize 300 people in any group, you know, and to have that so it's kept quiet and then done. It almost feels like federal involvement. How else do you do it that way? How else?
And obviously, like I don't. You can look into it too. Everybody that's listening, there's not a major neo-Nazi like personality in American history over the last 50 years that didn't turn out to be a federal agent or a federal informant. Every single one. Richard Spencer hasn't been confirmed yet, but God, would I be surprised if he wasn't.
Come on, Richard, what a joke these fucking people are.
Right.
Like, come on.
So that's why I wanted to ask you of like, hey, there's this weird, shadowy, like having a bunch of numbers, neo-Nazi organization just appearing all over America, faceless, masked up, like.
I think you got to wait for the media reel, man. You build up enough of the events and you have the hot takes ready, and all of a sudden just takes one thing to pop off, and then all of a sudden it's a talking point from Jen Psaki and Zombie Joe, and Zombie Joe rattles something about a horse and an elf on a farm somewhere, and they got a
Cory Booker sitting there nodding his head like it makes perfect sense.
exactly. And then, and then the horse and the elf with the farm, and they're reclaiming America on behalf of Hitler, and I don't know. When we got dead poodles out there, that's it. We need to start rounding them up. I mean, that's where we're at. So I think that's what you're probably seeing. You're seeing a packaging and saying like, oh, look, these people are stealth. They're organized. They can get together under the cover of no law enforcement knowing they're dangerous. We need to start tapping their phones more openly, and we need to start criminalizing speech that might be dog whistles to this group. Hashtag like AOK or,
Yeah, that shit is still
so whenever I see something like that, it certainly does ring of a federal op. And now that there's been multiple events with that many people, again, it's really hard to get 100 people out to these things. If you don't have a large platform, like say a radio show or even, or a YouTube show, even those people aren't able, if you're not Logan Paul, you're not getting thousands of people in the street.
Yeah, exactly.
And Logan Paul's not doing it. And as far as I know, Logan Paul is not a part of Reclaim America yet.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy. It's ridiculous to me. But all right, we've hit our hour and a half. I appreciate everything coming on. Give me. I'm stumbling over my words right now. Give me your plugs. You got any shows coming up? You got any cool guests where people can find you?
Rockfin.com/Jason Bermas is where it's at Jason Bermas. You kind of get to even see stuff that I don't cover in my videos, right? Because sometimes I blank out or I'm not able to cover a story. But I give away the vast majority of my stuff for free. If you are a premium subscriber, you get everybody's premium stuff. I think I might put this one under Premium Magnus when I post it on my page to bring people over to yours. I know you're not on Rockfin yet, and maybe you're having some trouble getting on there, but
I have you. I have one of like the admins of the actual organization. I've had Pasta, Fee, I've had Steve all like hit them up and like, hey, approve his application. I've heard nothing.
Okay. Well,
but I'm also lethally toxic.
Well, I don't know about toxic. I think it's unfortunate, man, because of the way that you were framed as you kind of came up, not only from that speech, but then people interviewing you, and you were able to amass a really good following, and then they took it away from you, in rapid fashion. In rapid fashion, we were able to build, and they were able to cut you off. And that
I was like 100 followers away from 10K on Twitter, and then before I got nuked.
Yeah, and to me, that shows you how badly they want to control the narrative, because you don't check the boxes that they want people to see. They want to see a certain left or a certain right. They want to see a certain militia member. They want to see all these things, and you don't check those boxes. And because of that, narrative pulled. So, like I said, I hope people check out where they're not pulling my narratives here at Rockfin. YouTube, great. They got cat videos over there, but I'm constantly having to self-censor, which I don't like. And I acknowledge, because again, I've got to reach those people, because if I'm just in one echo chamber, it doesn't really help, does it? So that's another thing that I really like that you're doing, bro, is you're talking to everybody that will talk to you. And as long I've always had these rules, as long as you're not like personally attacking and lying about me constantly, or a out and out literal bigot, like you hate somebody because of the color of their skin or who their sexual partner is, and based on that alone, I'll talk to you. We can have a conversation. If it's outside of that, we're great. But the minute I start hearing is like, there's some of these people that want to say they're anti-Zionist, right? And I hate to end it like this, because I'm constantly getting accused of one thing or the other. Either I hate the Jews or I'm a undercover Mossad agent. But I don't like to give this guy a plug, so I won't say his name, but he had another one of the trolls on that, they used to troll these pages, and it was constantly, anti-Zionist stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, one of them goes to the other one, what do you think it is? What do you think it is about, this Jewish cabal? He's like, the other guy turns to him and he goes, well, I think they're just born that way. And I'm like, and there was no challenge by the host at all. And if you think that somebody can inherently, literally be born evil because of either their parents' religious belief or bloodline, I'm sorry. I don't think we can have a discussion.
And it's so funny, because those types of people will come out and they'll be like, I'm a staunch individualist. I reject collectivism. And then it's like, but all these people are exactly the same.
Thank you. Thank you. And the other thing is, man, there is no superiority based on the color of your skin or even the culture you were born into. Even if, one culture promotes something that might be advantageous to your memory or your intellect or your ability to do something that might cause a stereotype, that doesn't mean that you are superior to another human being in any way, shape, or form. That means you do something better. And you do something better because of repetition. And that same human being in that nature versus nurture scenario, right? Like, hey, I'm about the size, I'm a little bit taller than Spud Webb. I'm never dunking a basketball. He found a way. There's a little bit of nature in there, but there's a lot of nurture in there too, right? So, these people that want to generalize and polarize and hate for hate's sake, or again, point to one group, that's not how the world works, man. There's varying cartels out there that are working against all of us, and they make up a consortium that I like to call the predator class. And I hope that you join myself and Magnus in fighting these people tooth and nail, every way, shape, and form you can.
Hell yeah. See, that's perfect to let it off. And yeah, for me, guys, I'm going to keep shilling it nonstop. The End the Damn Wars GoFundMe. We're about halfway now. We really need that to pay for all the flyers, the billboards, the permits, having people run around, put stickers and flyers up, and hopefully don't be arrested by the DC police. So I'm gonna definitely push that. Anyone there, give that a check out. We're real close. Go dig some quarters out of your nasty cup holder in your car that we all know you have, and throw some there. A little bit helps. And again, thank you for coming on, Jason. Thank you everybody for watching. And I'll see next week. I'll be at Revolution, where I'm going to be talking to like Ron Paul, and Edward Snowden's supposed to be there. That's going to be super cool. I don't know if I'm going to be doing a live show. If I do it, it'll probably be a bunch of libertarians drunk in a hotel room. So don't expect peak intellectual content. But until then, y'all, thanks for everybody to chat. You have a good one. Deuces.